Allow me to introduce myself. I am Claire. I am 46 years of age. I have been in a new marriage for 2 years now, without biological children, without pets, and without arms to embrace each morning. Simply a wooden cabin nestled in Asheville. In this serene space, I cultivate my lavender-hued tales during the afternoon, patiently anticipating my husband's return from each business journey. This week, he has ventured back to New York once more. Once more, I find myself alone at home, as is often the case. That evening, I prepared dinner on my own. Perfectly pan-seared salmon accompanied by a medley of roasted vegetables. Familiar fare once again. Another familiar glass of white wine. I activated the familiar jazz playlist. Seated in the kitchen, enveloped in the soft golden glow of the pendant lamp. It seemed as though I was trapped in a performance that had been endlessly replayed for the last 2 years. The gentle partner who understands the art of solitude. At that moment the doorbell chimed. I recoiled. The clock struck 8 in the evening. Who could possibly arrive at this late hour? I cracked the door open just a bit, and there he stood. Michael. Merely an echo. It is not merely a figment of imagination. Not merely a specter. Yet him. He stood in the porch light as if he had never departed. As if 2 decades hadn't slipped away since we parted ways on that college lawn. As if my whole existence had taken a different path after that instant. His hair had taken on a grayer hue. Unfamiliar lines etched themselves around his eyes. Yet those eyes, oh those eyes, they remained exactly the same. He remained silent for a moment. I didn't either. He gazed at me, gentle and hesitant, as if seeking approval to re-enter my realm once more. At last he spoke. Greetings, Claire. Only that. 20 years in one sound. I ought to have closed the door. I ought to have inquired about his presence. What led him to believe he could simply materialize after 2 decades of absence? Yet I chose not to. I took a step back and swung the door open wider. Step inside. I invited. As if I were completely composed within. As if my heart was unwilling to forget all that I had labored to conceal. We gathered around my kitchen table, the very one where I find myself dining alone each evening. 2 glasses of wine shared in our midst. The familiar jazz echoed. Yet this time it resonated with a deeper significance. I hesitated to pose the questions that lingered in my mind at the outset. Where have you wandered off to? What is the reason for this moment? Are you aware of what you abandoned? Instead, I inquired about the most secure option. What led you to discover my whereabouts? He offered a faint smile. Susan, he uttered. The person you once shared a living space with. Last month I encountered her in Chicago. She mentioned that you were here. What brings you here? A moment lingered. He lifted his gaze to meet mine. I couldn't help but keep you in my thoughts. A chuckle escaped my lips. Not due to its humor. I found myself at a loss, unsure of the next step to take. Do you really believe that's a phrase people utter after 20 years? No, he replied. It's not a common expression. It's an experience that resonates within individuals. Each time I envisioned a life devoid of your presence, the weight of that absence pressed heavily upon me. I found myself at a loss for words in response to that. I found it hard to accept the reality of it. The last time I laid eyes on Michael, we were both 26 years old. There I stood on the sidewalk, tears streaming down my face as he turned and walked away. To accept a position on the other side of the nation, to pursue a vision that left me behind. And now here he stood, requesting to grasp a strand I had previously interlaced into my history. The hands of the clock crept beyond the stroke of midnight. Our conversation lingered on. Recollections. Time-worn humor. That weekend in Vermont was unforgettable. The art of crafting letters, a cherished practice now overshadowed by the advent of cell phones. He recalled the blue sweater that I would often pilfer from his closet. I recalled the manner in which he would recite poetry, his voice resonating through the air, as if each word was crafted solely for my ears. At last he rose to his feet. I ought to take my leave, he remarked. I inclined my head in agreement. He strolled toward the door, then came to a halt. I'm not here to destroy your existence, he remarked. I've come to find out if you remain the woman I once adored. So are you feeling let down? I inquired. He wore a smile. "No," he replied. "You surpass all my memories of you." And just like that, he vanished. With a decisive click, I secured the door after him, extinguished the lights, slipped beneath the covers still clad in my clothes, and reclined there, gazing at the ceiling, as the echoes of yesteryear rapped gently against the confines of my heart, as if it had always been there. I reassured myself that it was merely a fleeting instant, a fleeting moment, a glimmer from days gone by, a fleeting encounter destined to return to the quietude from whence it came. That was the mantra I repeated to myself in the quiet hours following Michael's departure. Yet that was not the reality. The reality is, he occupied my thoughts incessantly. Perched in my writing chair beside the window, I cradled a steaming cup of coffee, feigning engagement with the second chapter of a novel that had long since lost its appeal. Yet my fingers lingered above the keys, as though each character I ever created suddenly lost their depth, in contrast to the individual who once guided me in experiencing the depths of emotion. I believed I had moved beyond that particular craving. It slips into your heart uninvited, and stirs a longing for the dreams you vowed to leave behind. For 2 decades, Michael existed as a mere specter, a recollection that resurfaced solely in the presence of melancholic melodies and solitary hours of the night. Yet now he had returned to reality. That was perilous. 2 days went by. He hasn't reached out to me. I haven't spotted him in town lately. No message received. I found myself lacking the closure I hadn't even known I still desired. And yet, with each buzz of my phone, my heart leapt in anticipation. Whenever a towering silhouette drifted past the coffee shop window, I gazed upward filled with hope. It was a deeply embarrassing experience. I found myself bound in the sacred union of marriage. An adult woman, a woman who had toiled diligently to create a serene and honorable existence. Yet within, I experienced a resurgence of my youthful spirit, reminiscent of being 26 once more. More troubling, I felt truly alive. On the 3rd day, I finally permitted myself to seek out his name on Facebook. There is no profile available. There are no new developments to report. There are no indications. I scoured the internet for Michael Langston, navigating through a myriad of faces that turned out not to be his. I found myself composing a message to Susan, my former roommate, only to erase it before pressing send. I aimed to avoid any semblance of desperation. Yet I was. Not for his physique. Not at this moment, it seems. For those left in silence. For the version of me that he alone had come to understand. The iteration I had confined for years. Like a vintage garment that has lost its shape. Yet I found it impossible to part with. That evening slumber eluded me. My husband sent a message from New York. Important gathering scheduled for tomorrow. I cherish you. I responded. Wishing you all the best. I miss you. Yet I refrained. Not quite. That filled me with fear. At the stroke of midnight, I rose from my slumber. Prepared a cup of tea. I lingered by the window wrapped in my robe. And then, illuminating beams cutting through the darkness, a vehicle crept into my driveway with a deliberate slowness. My breath hitched. It was indeed him. Once more. I remained still. Failed to open the door. I observed quietly from the shadows of the curtain. As he emerged, a mysterious object clutched in his grasp. A tome. It belonged to us, a creation of our own. A compilation of verses we once shared in unison, marked with our reflections in the borders. The very one I believed I had misplaced during my recent relocation. He set it down softly on the welcome mat. There will be no knock this time. Only quietude. With that, he drove off into the distance. Once he had departed, I turned the handle and opened the door. Grasped the book with trembling fingers. Within lay a note. A fragment of our existence continues to dwell within these pages. I'm uncertain about your desires, Claire. Yet I'm not prepared to bid farewell once more if you aren't. I found myself standing there, my bare feet meeting the chill of the ground beneath me. The book held tightly against my heart. Heart racing. I found myself equally uncertain about my desires. Yet I was aware that it was far from silence. The following morning I reached out to him. An hour passed as I painstakingly dialed. And another 10 minutes until the call begins. The phone rang once. On the other hand, And then came his voice. Claire. As if he had anticipated my arrival all along. As if he had been poised by the phone, anticipation hanging in the air. Our words were few. I merely inquired whether he remained in town. He agreed. I asked, "Would you like to grab a coffee?" He remarked, "I was hoping you'd inquire." Our paths crossed at the charming cafe nestled by the serene lake. The very same establishment that once thrived as a bookstore in the early 2000s. We lingered by the window. 2 lattes shared in our midst. A solitary table. Countless unspoken words linger in the silence that separates. In the light of day he appeared transformed. Not quite as spectral. More like a man who had experienced an entire existence separate from my own, yet somehow retained the precise contour of my laughter. He grinned as I added an excessive amount of sugar to my beverage. "You continue to do that," he remarked. "I didn't realize you were paying attention." "I have always been aware, Claire." Our conversation stretched on for hours, concerning all matters, concerning the void, where he had wandered, to the place I had ventured. How we never penned another word after that final farewell. How his mother had departed the previous year. I experienced a miscarriage once. How neither of us had transformed into the individuals we once envisioned ourselves to be. And yet, there we found ourselves. There remains an air of incompleteness. At one moment, our fingers lightly grazed the surface of the table. I remained steadfast. He didn't either. In that fleeting instant. "One moment, please." The burden of rings and vows, along with 20 years, dissipated into the ether. It was merely the two of us. Claire and Michael. Prior to the errors. Prior to the diversions. As we departed from the cafe, the sky had transformed into a soft shade of pale blue. Nearly white. A sky that seems to pause, as if in a moment of anticipation. I escorted him to his rental vehicle. As he turned the handle and pushed the door ajar, a moment of uncertainty washed over him. "May I pose a question to you?" I gave a slight nod. "Do you find joy in your life?" It was a straightforward inquiry, yet it broke something within me. For I had never summoned the courage to pose the question myself. "I'm not sure," I murmured, and I truly meant it. As if joy had become a distant recollection, an experience I once possessed, yet now eludes my ability to articulate. Michael cast his gaze upon me in that moment, as if he were striving to commit every nuance to memory. And then he uttered the words that will forever linger in my memory. "You don't seem like someone who desires to leave a lasting impression. You appear to be someone who longs for a comforting embrace." I refrained from kissing him. Not at that moment. However, I pondered it deeply, journeying back to the familiar embrace of home. Throughout the entire process of preparing dinner, I refrained from eating. All the way to bed beside a man whose voice had softened with the passage of time. In the stillness of the night, I found myself dreaming of the vibrant days of being 26 once more. The breeze dances through my hair. In the embrace of Michael's arms. Of a version of myself I hadn't revisited in decades. Upon awakening, the pain in my chest whispered truths I could no longer dismiss. This did not bring closure. It was a portal. I found myself unprepared to close it off. My husband remained in New York. His messages had grown increasingly brief. Increased commerce, diminished warmth. "The flight has been delayed. I'll be home on Thursday. Could you please take a moment to check the mail? Retire for the night at an early hour. Don't stay awake for me." I chose not to respond immediately. As I began to compose, my fingers danced across the keys. "All right. Take care." It happened without thought. Respectful. A reaction rather than an emotion. On that very night I reached out to Michael. "You mentioned that your observations never ceased. Please come over tomorrow. Following the descent of the sun. If your intentions remain unchanged." For a full 10 minutes I found myself transfixed by the message, my finger hovering over the send button. His response was succinct, a single word. "Okay." My hands started to tremble. As dusk fell the following evening, I ignited 2 candles and kept the porch light aglow. Devoid of romance. Simply cozy. Humankind. I donned a modest navy blue sweater. Gentle, weathered. Bare facet. Simply chapstick. I refused to become a mere figment of someone else's imagination. I yearned for recognition, the authentic version of myself, the iteration that time had shaped, mellowed, and elongated. As the clock struck 7:12 p.m., the sound of the doorbell echoed through the quiet room. Michael appeared anxious. His hands rested deep within the confines of his coat pockets. Silence enveloped the moment as I swung the door open, and he remained mute. I moved aside to grant him entry. Initially, we exchanged few words. I filled the cup with steaming tea. We gathered in the living room. The fireplace crackled, as if it were aware that an event was on the brink of unfolding. We conversed softly, deliberately. He recounted his years spent in Seattle, his separation from his spouse, the woman he nearly wed, yearning for children, while he remained indifferent to the idea. I shared with him the painful experiences of the miscarriages, the solitude within my marriage, a truth I was too proud to acknowledge. The evenings I lingered by the window, yearning for a shift in the world outside. He paid attention, as if it held any significance. And that, above all else, unraveled me. Eventually, I rose to replenish our cups. He trailed behind me into the kitchen. As I pivoted, I was taken aback by how near he stood, merely a breath apart. His gaze sought out my own. "I don't belong here," he murmured quietly. "I understand. Yet, you occupy my thoughts incessantly." "I understand," I murmured, in a moment of spontaneity without consent or forethought. His hand brushed against my cheek, a gentle caress that sent shivers down my spine. Not driven by desire, yet with deep respect, as if I were a delicate thing he feared would shatter. I had the power to intervene. I might have chosen to distance myself, yet I refrained, for that moment was essential to me, a singular, exquisite moment, captured in time and forever cherished, where I existed beyond the roles of a spouse or a source of letdown. I was merely a woman yearning to be desired. He pressed his lips against mine. "Unhurried. Proceed with caution." Heartbreaking. His hands quivered gently as they embraced my waist. I couldn't tell you how much time passed as we remained in that stillness. Yet I am aware of the emotions that stirred within me. Melancholy. Sweet relief. Something I had not experienced in many years. A longing that required no justification. Yet I withdrew before it could evolve into something deeper. "I can't," I gasped, struggling for air. He inclined his head in agreement, calm and composed, unapologetic, merely sorrowful. "I apologize," he uttered. "I am not," I murmured softly. We lingered in that moment a little longer, two individuals caught in a decision we dared not embrace. Then he uttered a remark that took me by surprise. "Tomorrow I will be departing." "Pardon." "I have arrived to bid farewell." Yet in that moment I caught sight of you, and the desire to hold on tightened within me once more. A tightness gripped my throat. "Are you still planning to go?" He cast his gaze downward. Then it returned to me. "I refuse to be the cause of your lost identity." He departed shortly thereafter. Do not plead. There are no guarantees. Only a gentle kiss upon my forehead, and the sound of the door closing echoed like the last chapter of a story. I lingered in that still house for what felt like an eternity, still grasping the delicate teacups. At last, when I took that step, as I glanced at the kitchen window, my reflection caught my eye. For the first time in many years, I appeared as if I were a woman on the brink of recalling the essence of feeling once more. He departed the following morning. This time there will be no farewell, no note. Silence enveloped the space, with no sound of a knock echoing through the air. As I drew back the curtains, all I saw was an unoccupied driveway, and a silence so profound it reverberated. I found myself standing barefoot in the kitchen, gazing out at the chilly blue morning, and pondered which fragment of my being had departed alongside him. That evening my husband came back. I welcomed him just as I always had. The meal is ready and waiting on the table. The wine cascaded into the glass. A kiss that softly brushed against the skin. He remained oblivious to any changes. What would compel him to do that? For years I had been fading away before his very eyes. Yet, an undeniable shift had occurred. An act that cannot be undone. For I had come to understand the sensation of being desired once more. Not from obligation, not merely out of routine. Yet it was the gaze of another that truly recognized my existence. I remained faithful to my husband. Not entirely. Not in the manner that truly matters on paper. Yet, in every other aspect I had already crossed the line. The reality is, I have no regrets about what transpired with Michael. I lament what never came to pass. In the days that followed his departure, I found myself endlessly revisiting that night in my mind. Those hands of his. His voice resonated with a unique quality. The burden of his quietude. Above all else, the memory of his gaze lingered as he uttered his farewell for the second time. Not through language, yet with moderation. The next week I took a moment to compose a letter to him. I did not send it. However, this is what it conveyed. Dear Michael, 2 decades have passed since you departed for the first time. It has been a week since you departed once more. I have experienced an entire existence nestled between those 2 farewells. Yet, it's important to understand, those were the sole instances when I sensed that someone truly recalled the version of me I cherished the most. I'm uncertain whether we would have endured. I find myself questioning whether we were ever destined to be. Yet you awakened a sensation within me that had long been dormant, reminding me that the woman I once was still lingers on. I will always be left to ponder what could have unfolded if we had been granted just one more day. Perhaps we didn't require additional time after all. Perhaps it was merely a matter of finding the perfect moment to recall. Thank you no matter where you find yourself. Claire. The letter was carefully folded. He slipped it into the back of the poetry book he had given back to me, the one adorned with our annotations in the margins. The narrative of our past unfolds within the margins. Life continued its course. My husband never inquired. My companions were blissfully unaware. Yet on certain evenings, when silence envelopes the space and the home seems overwhelmingly vast, crack open that book. I revisited the verses that once captured our hearts, spoken aloud, gently, to nobody. In those fleeting moments, I allowed my mind to wander back in time. For even when we cannot hold on to those we cherish, at times the mere act of recalling them can be sufficient to sustain our very essence.